affects all dimensions of society: environmental, social, health, economic, cultural, and of course, political. In a context of displacement caused by climate and environmental crises, deep social inequalities are exacerbated. The communities that contribute the least to global warming suffer the most from its negative impact. In 2022, more than 32 million people were displaced by a disaster and climate-related event, the highest number in a decade. The effect of desertification, rising sea levels, and increased frequency and severity of weather events are clear violations of human rights, including the right to life, water and sanitation, food, health, and adequate housing. Today, 84% of refugees come from countries that are highly vulnerable to climate change. Climate change is having a growing impact on human security around the world. It's a threat multiplier. It exacerbates resource scarcity, exacerbate existing social, economic, and environmental factors. In a world that is no longer the world that constitutes national and international institutions as we know them today, it may be necessary to rethink our understanding of the current crisis and its causal link with geopolitical, health, economic, and social crises to reformulate comprehensive response. This very interesting panel will bring together different representatives from public, private, and civil society to discuss the importance of changing the way we understand and act on the environment, which consists of compartmentalizing phenomena without integrating their multiple and interconnected dimensions. So we have a very interesting panel with wonderful panelists, and we are going to start today with the chair of the IPCC, Mr. Ramon Pich Madruga. So Ramon Pich Madruga served as vice chair of the IPCC from last year. He has been director of the Center for World Economic Studies in Cuba since 2013. He's also an associate professor at the Faculty of Economics at La Universidad de La Habana. Moreover, he has been a member of the Scientific Advisor Committee of the Inter-American Institute for Research on Global Change from 2007 and 2013, and a member of the Academy of Science of Cuba since 2012. He has a degree in Foreign Trade Economics from the University of Havana, a master in Social Science from the University of Lund, Sweden, and a PhD in Economics from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM. You are very welcome, Ramon.
Thank you very much, Patricia. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event, the possibility of being here today, sharing with you some ideas with regard to this crucial topic. Also, I would like to acknowledge the relevance of putting climate change as a development challenge and also explore further this human dimension of climate change. And in this regard, I would like to recall that the IPCC has been assessing the impact, vulnerability, and adaptation issues, particularly in Working Group 2 of the assessments of the IPCC. I would say that this working group is very relevant for analyzing or for revisiting all of these implications. In fact, with regard to the human dimension of climate change, it is also important to take into account that, at the moment, according to some surveys, international surveys, for instance, the survey by the World Economic Forum, which is taking place every year, this forum recognizes that around half of the 10 global risks for the next 10 years are environmental risks. And many of them has to do with climate change, of course.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this important event on the topic of environmental.
Me voy al principio de la moda. Muy buen día. Como dice el Pedro Martín. Muy buen día. Tenemos el cabalista.
¿Ricardo?
¿Mejor?
Now you can start again. Sorry, Ramon.
Starting again? Okay, okay.
Puedes
Okay.
comenzar de nuevo.
Okay,
Voy a
okay.
No, no,
comenzar
no,
de
no, no,
nuevo.
no.
Okay, okay.
Opción.
Espérate, Párale, para
Se escucha la
que
traducción.
tienen que activar la traducción en sí.
Can we stop the translation, please? If it's not. Ramon, can you start again, please?
Okay, thank you very much, Patricia, and I would like to start by thanking the organizing committee of this event for the invitation to share with you some ideas concerning climate change as a challenge for development and for highlighting the human dimension of climate change. Working Group 2 of the IPCC is the working group dealing specifically with impacts, vulnerability, and adaptation of climate change, and there, in addition to the regional perspective with regard to climate change, it is also an assessment with regard to the different sectors and the implication for relevant sectors of climate change. In fact, climate change is affecting practically all socioeconomic sectors, and in that sense, this human dimension is crucial for understanding the full picture of this global challenge. There are implications, for instance, for agriculture, implications for tourism, implications for water resources, for health, for biodiversity, and practically, as I said before, all sectors. And as also has been highlighted in the presentation of this event, most vulnerable regions correspond to developing countries, and within developing countries, those local communities which are lacking capacities to deal with this huge challenge. I would like also to mention that there are some surveys, international surveys, calling the attention with regard to the weight of the environmental problems nowadays in the international situation. And in that sense, I would like to highlight, for instance, the survey carried out by the World Economic Forum, which is taking place every year at the beginning of the year. And the last survey, the one corresponding to 2024, highlighted that half of the top 10 global risks for the next 10 years are classified as environmental challenges. Some of them dealing with climate change implications, for instance, the extreme weather events, critical change of Earth's system, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, and natural resources shortage, and there is another one that has to do with pollution. The AR6, the sixth assessment report of the IPCC, as you know, was a particularly intense cycle in which three special reports were generated. The one dealing with the warming of 1.5, indicating also the impacts, not only in general, but of course highlighting the human dimension of those impacts of going beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius in terms of global warming. And there were also a special report on climate change and land. And there, in this special report, the food security was one of the key aspects, in addition to other problems dealing with land degradation and desertification. And the third special report on ocean and climate change also highlighted this human dimension of climate change, among other critical issues associated to this global challenge. With regard to the result of the contributions of the three working groups of the IPCC, there are also relevant conclusions, relevant findings, and I would like to summarize some of them that are, in my view, common messages out of the AR6. First one, the urgent need for action on climate change. Secondly, the importance of responses that are immediate but equitable. Thirdly, the risk that climate change poses for compliance with sustainable development. And finally, the growing costs and risks associated to delay in responding to climate change. This last cycle of the IPCC, including the special report and also the contributions of the three working groups, recognized the interdependence between climate, ecosystem and biodiversity and human societies, which is in the center of this event. Also the value of diverse forms of knowledge, the close linkages between adaptation, mitigation, ecosystem health, human well-being and sustainable development, and the increasing diversity of actors involved in climate action. There was also in this report, in particular in the synthesis report, reference to the urgency for near-term integrated climate action, the benefits of this near-term climate action, mitigation and adaptation options across systems, also the synergies and trade-off with sustainable development. This is an aspect that was already assessed in the previous cycle, but in the R6 was much more was indeed developed, and it's crucial identifying this not only the synergies but also the potential trade-off and options for let's say potentiate these synergies and also to face the trade-off in that sense. Equity and inclusion were prioritized, were assessed, particularly prioritizing equity, climate justice, social justice, inclusion, and just transition. Governance and policies in this regard were also assessed, as well as finance, technology, and international cooperation considered as key enablers for climate action. These are key points that I would like to highlight at this first part, not to go into much more detail. So I would like to conclude for the moment here, and then I come back for more specific conclusions.
Sorry, Ramon. We were all supposed to use this to avoid that. I don't know what is it happening. I don't know, Jasmine. Could you help us going? Could you help us going somewhere else to ask?
Oh, you're echoing.
Hello? Now? Now it works? Okay, it works. So thank you, Ramon. We're going to come back to this subject, but thank you for explaining how the Area 6 are including all the human being variables that are so important. Obviously, I have some questions about how do we do to transfer this knowledge in the policymakers, and in the global citizenships in general. Now, I wish to know if the Like video is ready or not. So, Like kan Oxtruplunde, I'm sure I haven't said that properly, is the share of the Velux Fonden. We really are very grateful with Velux Fonden. They have prepared a lot of those panels together with us through Charlotte Mogensen, who unfortunately cannot be there, but she's listening to us. So in addition of that, Like holds several other significant positions, including board membership at Mermaid Asset Management, Funds, Mergler Cell Cap, sorry for that, and at the Quera Fund in Malawi. Likenland has been a board member of ADECAPS since 2008 and was appointed as vice chair in 2017. She's also a member of the investment committee of Velux Fonden and Willem Fonden, while chairing both the investment committee and the board of Velux Typhoon. Like has previously worked as a financial journalist, bringing insight into the dynamic of international financial markets. So, are we ready with the video? Yes, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this important event on the role of environmental philanthropy in the triple planetary crisis. You might not all be familiar with the work of Veloxfonden, so let me just tell you what we do. We work to enhance people's lives and opportunities in a democratic and sustainable society. And we do this by supporting research and initiatives within or across social conditions, age groups, transitions in adult life, society and culture, as well as the marine environment. And when it comes to enhancing opportunities, we must acknowledge that this year is not just an opportunity, this is the year of action. After the UN Biodiversity COP16 in Colombia, we now set the stage for COP29 for the trajectory the world needs on climate change, as well as on nature and biodiversity loss and pollution and waste, which are closely linked. And later this month, the final negotiations on the plastics treaty will also be held. These intertwined global frameworks are, in essence, a master plan to create a better future for humanity. In this regard, we, as philanthropists, have the possibility to assist in creating a healthy environment with a focus on the triple planetary crisis: the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. This environmental degradation is why, in part, only 17% of the SDG targets are currently on track and over 1/3 stalled or simply going in reverse. Global leaders have come to understand that without actions and transformation, it will not be possible to achieve the 2030 agenda. Veloxfonden has started the journey with Foundation Cortes Solari, MERI Foundation, to pave the way for a North-South cooperation amongst environmental philanthropists, to support the multilateral environmental agreements and strengthening the science policy interface. We have a lot of work to do. We all know the SDGs are underfunded, especially SDG 14 on oceans, that receives the least amount of long-term funding of any of the SDGs. Meanwhile, investments in nature-based solutions must triple by 2030 to meet climate, nature, and land neutrality targets. In the global biodiversity framework, the world has committed to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, to protect 30% of the terrestrial and marine environment, and to put 30% of land and marine areas under restoration by 2030. We have committed to reduce nutrients introduced into the environment, reduce the risk from pesticides and hazardous chemicals, tackle invasive species, and more. Here, we as philanthropists can coordinate our efforts and support the UN processes and deliver on the triple planetary crisis. And in doing so, deliver huge, sustainable, developmental benefits. The international negotiators are meeting in South Korea in a few weeks, and as a foundation, our hope is that we will have the instrument that addresses the full cycle of plastic, the full life cycle of plastic, including its production, design, and disposal. And here at COP29, we must act on adaptation by leaning heavily on nature, by harnessing traditional knowledge, by restoring and managing ecosystems, reforming food systems to protect livelihoods and food security, by prioritizing early warnings and preparedness, climate-proofing cities and infrastructure. Hopefully, the efforts of Foundation Cortes Solaris, MERI Foundation, and Veloxfonden can instigate partnerships between UNEP, CBD, and IPCC, and global philanthropists from North and South. We need a coordinated, cross-sector, and multinational approach. Our collective task is to make philanthropy work together with the UN processes. I'll close with an offer to help anyone who wants to understand more about private philanthropy and how we can help as philanthropists. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Lieke Oxtrup, Chair and family members of the Veloxfonden, Certainly, we are very happy to have this relationship between both institutions that promote science and the policymakers, and in particular the work made by the IPCC and WMO. Now we are going to give the floor to Adrian Lema, who is the director of the Denmark National Center for Climate Research based in Copenhagen, Denmark, at the Danish Meteorological Institute. He has many years of experience in bridging knowledge and policy, and now translate climate science into public awareness, policy making, and practical application. Adrian is leading for 4 unit leaders, and through them, around 80 people. Adrian is also chair of the Danish Greenlanding and Faroese Committee for the UN Ocean Decade, member of the UN UNESCO Ocean Decade Advisory Board. Adrian, can you hear us? I saw you somewhere.
Yes, I can indeed.
Yeah, okay. You are very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia, and thank you so much for the kind invitation to this event. And thank you very much for the introduction also just before by Roman. So many of the things that I could have said, he already explained much better than I could do. So I'll try to look into a few other things. I will try to share my screen, so please let me know if that works. Here we go.
Yes, it works.
Good. So thank you so much. Just a few comments on how we can observe the changes in the climate, but also how those changes are really having an impact on a human level. So these are just a few examples that I'll give here. So already now we do know that climate change is something that has already had an impact. So even the global warming levels that we have experienced is having an impact. So it's not something in the far future. It's actually something which we are experiencing all the time in different parts of the world. Just some examples here is in the area of water availability and food production, which is of course having an impact on the livelihoods of people in many areas of the world, especially in the global south. Another area is in the area of health, where infectious diseases is already on the rise, but also other types of impacts, including malnutrition and mental health impacts. Third, we do have an increase in extreme weather events, which is having already a big impact on cities, settlements, and infrastructure throughout the world, in many different areas of the world, which is again also impacting the livelihoods of those people who live in affected areas, again, especially in the global south, who are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, but also in the global north, as we have seen many examples of as well. And finally, the area of biodiversity and ecosystems. So we do not have here a global assessment of the impacts already happening, but we do know from local impacts that biodiversity and ecosystems are really being pressured also by climate change already now. So the question is, what can we expect for the future? So if we do know that the global warming levels of just about 1.1 degrees above pre-industrial levels is already having an impact, we also know that with the current ambitions and implemented policies around the world, we might experience global warming levels of up to 3 degrees Celsius if we take into account what is already on the table. We also know that if changes are made in policies around the world in the wrong direction, it could be even higher global warming levels. But we also know that we have the opportunity as the global arena to lower global warming levels to something closer within the Paris Agreement if collective action is taken fast and expeditious. But global warming levels really matter. And just to give one example of that is that the extreme events will take place with every degree of global warming that we experience. So if we take heat, humidity risks to human health, we can see that when global warming levels is rising, so is the number of days and certain areas of the world where heat is posing a severe risk to human health, including including mortality rates. And the more purple this you see on the map, the more risk is posed on individuals of mortality. And we can see here with the global projected warming levels, we will have a mortality risk for humans every day, each year in the future if we do not lower global warming levels. So this is really something which is of extreme importance to take into account. What is important here is that it's not only the risk for individuals, these risks are increasingly compound, complex, and cascading. So if we take the same example of extreme heats that I just explained before and the impacts of that, it's not only the mortality rates and the human health, it's also really a societal change and impact that is extremely complex. So just to take a few examples, again here from the IPCC, is that when heat and drought is on the rise, you will have a reduced soil moisture, which produces a lower amount of food yield, food quality, which can raise food insecurity, can raise food prices. Those food prices are unfortunately impacting those individuals around the world who have the least, who are most vulnerable, both to climate change but also to their income levels. This will increase malnutrition, decrease quality of life, include reduced labor capacity, and that labor capacity will have an impact again on many different sectors of the world, as also Ramon explained very well. So this is to explain that we have to look at climate change as environmental problems and human problems, which are increasingly complex and cascading and very difficult to deal with if global warming continues. A final example from my own part of the world, in Denmark, a small country with a long sea and coast level line. We have used IPCC scenarios to make a climate atlas of what are the extreme weather events that will impact us in Denmark. We made new new calculations recently that the current 100-year storm surge events, that by statistics is something that we see very rarely in Denmark, one time per 100 years, is at the end of this century, in 75 years, something that we will experience every third year around Denmark on average, and in some areas every second year, explained by the red on the map to the left here, which again is something which will have extreme changes for the cities, for the solution that is necessary, adaptation solutions, which again will have an impact both in financial terms, but also on the biodiversity and ecosystems, coastal areas, coastal restoration possibilities, and so forth. It is something which is really of extreme complexity, both on the impacts, but also extreme complexity on the solutions that is necessary. If we take the look at the map to the right, this is a representation of a Copenhagen storm surge event, which will be possible with the current projections of global warming levels if we do not provide the correct adaptation solutions. And what we can see here from those of you maybe familiar with Copenhagen is that this is much of the city center, which is basically flooded in a storm surge event like the one projected with current global warming levels, something which will have extreme implications. And even if we do not foresee these events because of correct adaptation measures, those adaptation measures will also have very complex governance issues, and something that we need to look into from many different perspectives of society, both in terms of governance, finance, and infrastructure development. Just to take one example, not from the Global South, even though we do know that the Global South will be hit much harder than, for instance, a resource-rich city like Copenhagen in Denmark. And with that, I hope this was a few good examples to explain what is really at risk with the ongoing climate change, both in terms of human impacts, biodiversity and ecosystems impacts, and societal impacts at large. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Please stay there for the conversation. Now we are going to give the floor to David Enworth. David Enworth is the Information Officer for the Secretariat of the Convention of Biological Diversity and the focal point for the United Nations Decade on Biodiversity. He led the team that developed and implemented the marketing campaign for the International Year of Biodiversity in 2010. David's work includes support to the identification and creation of indicators of public awareness on biodiversity and its value to human livelihoods. He has been with the Secretariat since 2003, working on a variety of communication campaigns, including the annual campaign for the International Day for Biodiversity. We know that you have traveled a lot, so thank you very much to be here, David. You have the floor.
Great, thanks very much. So thanks to the organizers for inviting me to participate. Yes, I'm the head of communications for the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and I'm fresh from the results of our COP29, where we achieved some fairly historic results for biodiversity protection and sustainable use. So we've heard from Ramon, and we've heard from our colleague in Copenhagen, some pretty chilling figures, some pretty serious and to be honestly, really affecting me at the heart, some of the future that we're looking at. What I want to talk about is a possible path outwards, and so I think our conversation can be about the way that we react to this. So the other thing too is remember that my remarks are going to come from the perspective of someone who works for a multilateral environment agreement. We're coming to terms with the impact of multiple crises on our work. So the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the pollution crisis, and all these other elements as well. And so this agreement that I work for has come to realize that the solution to moving away from crisis or to addressing it is a whole of society approach, something that breaks down the silos in which we work at the international level, and this is absolutely the fundamental way forward. So first of all, we're focusing on the climate matters here, but I mean in the opening remarks for the panel too, it's pretty clear that we're dealing with this 21st century experience of a polycrisis. I'm sure we've heard this phrase expressed before. It dates from the 1970s and it's emerged more in the recent decades. And this is describing a complex of crises and tensions that can't really be explained by one single logic. I mean, we've seen the analysis here that looks at how climate change can have these impacts, but where does this, climate change come from? Where does climate change crises come from? Where does biodiversity crisis, pollution, etc.? So, I mean, the list of the crises that we're dealing with right now in the 21st century are incredibly long. I mean, so we're talking about typically the triple crisis of climate change, pollution, biodiversity loss, but we're talking about economic crises. In a post-COVID world, we're talking about inflation. We're talking about an indebted South and a financial system that's strained. We're talking about migration. We're talking about overall alienation experienced in societies from developed to developing as well. We're talking about health crises, pandemics matter, and we're talking about military security crises that are also taking place as well. So these are multiple dimensions to the crises, and all we saw from our colleague from Denmark here, the notion of how climate can have these other impacts on health and food, etc., like that. There are arguments that they're going up in a lot of ways. Now, it's also clear from the conversations that these crises, including the biodiversity one, have a disproportionate impact on the poorest. For us under the convention, we're aware that the poorest of the poor are the people who really rely on biodiversity for their basic needs. You know, they don't have the cash to be part of the production and consumption economy. They don't have the resources to find substitutes for, crops that fail, for the fibers they need for clothing and housing. They don't have substitutes for clean water that's provided by biodiversity, for medicines, etc. And so, as it's been made clear, they also suffer the most under climate change. So the crises we're looking at, whether it's climate change or biodiversity or pollution or these other host of polycrises, they've got their roots in human behaviors and systems that we've created that I think we can date back, easily to the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, different rounds of these sort of things as well. Now, for ages, we've tended to approach the analysis of these crises and the search for these solutions at the international level in a siloed manner. So, dealing with the question of the impacts of economic growth, quality, standards of living, was seen as the domain of economics and questions of the market. Security issues was seen as a question of military and strategic studies questions. We know now that the environmental dimension between all of these is fundamental and key. The planet and its ecosystems are the underpinnings of growth, of human well-being, and of our economies. And security considerations stem as much from environmental stresses as other traditional security concerns. Our COP in Cali, Colombia, COP16, had the theme of peace with nature to look at this relationship, that in fact the nature of environmental stresses could be the source for many environmental concerns. Now, within the work that we're all doing here, whether it's the Climate Change Convention, the work under biodiversity, or the plastics treaties coming up, we have a lot of our blind spots. So me as the Convention Biodiversity, we are one of the environmental pillars for sustainable development coming out of 1992 in Rio Convention. And so that was expressed not in the creation of an overarching framework. It was expressed in the creation of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the creation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. 3 separate international conventions. And the truth is that these agreements for the first, half at least, if not more half of their existence, really worked feverishly with their own communities, their own scientific research, working with their parties in silos, their own particular actors to move forward. And they really, for decade and a half, there wasn't a lot of focus on the relationships between all of these things. So what happened, I think, for us was governments realizing after a decade and a half that these agreements were not achieving their objectives. And then there has been this movement, I think in the last 12 years, to zoom out, to take a focus that looks at the relationships between these challenges and the possible ways of moving forward. Our colleagues at the IPCC have done, the pioneering, the basics, the scientific work that underpins the work in this convention process. But there's other assessments that have taken place as well. So IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, is doing the same thing for biodiversity. There has been global assessments on agriculture to look at these things. What's happened, I think, in these ages, and I was talking to Ramon before the panel started about the work of IPCC and IPBES, the workshops and things they brought together, is to understand that can we share this data? Can we look at the roots of these crises together? So, for example, my next advertisement now is for the upcoming IPBES plenary that's going to take place in Namibia in December. And one of the things they're going to release is the Nexus assessment, this assessment that looks at the relationship between a lot of these varieties and tensions and crises and how we can look at their relationship and their way going forward. So that is sort of a direction that we need to. But beyond the assessments, I think one of the things we need to ask is that with these assessments, are we moving forward towards coherent policy solutions that address the complex nature of these crises? So in the work that we did under the Convention on Biodiversity, we only started to realize that the factors that allowed us or that prevented us from achieving the Aichi biodiversity targets over the last decade was that we were talking primarily to the biodiversity community. We talked to the Ministries of Natural Resources, the Ministries of Environment. Maybe we talked to the people that involved in the protected areas there, but we didn't. We weren't getting to the root causes of biodiversity loss. We were looking at what was happening around the human behaviors. We weren't looking at the production systems, the economic incentives that are leaning to these patterns of unsustainability. So it's clear that moving the needle on these negative trends takes work with other sectors. So we need to work with production and consumption. We need to work with the systems of subsidies that are causing the harm we need to stop. We need to look at the clear relationship of climate change and mitigation efforts as well. We need to look at systems change, and I think that the presentation from the colleague from Denmark point out an example of climate change affecting an overall food security system. We need to look at food systems, but we need to have that same conversation for infrastructure. You know, how do we incorporate solutions that build a climate resilient infrastructure, but one that looks at biodiversity as well? We need to look at subsidies to fossil fuels. So the work that takes place here dealing with those subsidies and dealing with that is crucial to the work under the convention. We need to look at the business case. In our case, the business case for biodiversity. There is an argument that businesses actually, if they don't protect biodiversity, their entire business model is at risk. The other thing we need to look at is the empowerment of other actors. So we need to look at the empowerment of indigenous peoples and local communities, civil society, women and youth, and then also local governments. It's something I hope we talk about as well, as we're here at the international forum where nations and parties are looking at, but the subnational level is where a lot of these people work in a very clear way. And we need to also complement this with additional work we're doing with other sectors. When I originally made my notes, we're going to have Maria Vieira of WHO on the panel, and so I had a whole bit about the work that we're doing on health and biodiversity, and we had a hint of that in the presentation we got here as well. That's a crucial example of where we know that the ways to better deliver on human health has to do with climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, and biodiversity protection as well. And we under the convention have got this global plan of action now for health and biodiversity that brings these different sectors together as well. So I'm excited to hear more about the way that we'll be working with IPCC and the other panelists and looking at civil society. So the other thing is that we're here at a climate COP, but the climate COP in the last few years has moved towards questions of synergies. Last year at COP28, there was an initiative that brought together the presidency of the Biodiversity COP and the presidency of the Climate COP to look at the way that these national actions, so NDCs and National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, NBSAPs, can be worked at together in a practical way. It's kind of astounding that it's taken that many years for us to look at that, but they do the same things in many ways. They should do the same things in many ways as well. So that's moving forward. There's the Rio Trio initiative that's coming to look at bringing those together, and I know at UNCCD's COP in Riyadh, they're also going to talk about the ways of bringing things together. And then the other thing too is we're here, but we're already looking towards COP30 in Belém next year, where I know that the Colombian presidency of our COP16 is really interested to look at how do we move forward on how our objectives under our framework are going to make action moving forward. So the time I've been here for the last week is I'm seeing that the conversations are taking place, and there's a recognition of the need for coherence, but that actually has to take place on the ground. And so in fact, I'm excited to be in this pavilion, but when I go over to the NDC pavilion, I get excited as well when they talk about biodiversity action. Or in the pavilion for indigenous peoples and local communities, they bring together biodiversity action as well. So I'll come to an end now, but I guess the one thing I want to point out is that, when we're here talking about this need to bring things together, but when you talk to subnational governments, when you talk to local communities, indigenous people that are living the impacts of the crises, the labels that we're using aren't actually as important for them. It's all about, their livelihoods and the quality of life and how these crises are affecting them as well. So for them, the action we take, whether it's climate or biodiversity or land degradation, they're really very much the same thing. So what I'd be excited to hear in the conversation, and also I want the people in the audience to get involved in not just questions, but the dialogue too, is what is this path forward? Understanding that we have all these clear human crises, what is the way to move forward towards this integration and synergy? Thanks.
you very much, David, to give us a question also, because I think that's the dialogue at the end of the panel. But before that, I'm going to give the floor to our executive president and founder of Corte Solari, Francisca Corte Solari, who is an entrepreneur, environmentalist, and philanthropist who has dedicated her life to integral and sustainable development initiatives in Chile and around the world. With an extensive personal and family background in the world of design and retail, in 2002 she founded Philanthropy Corte Solari, a philanthropy project that promotes integral sustainable development through integral education, climate change mitigation, and biodiversity conservation. Francisca has been an outstanding promoter of climate change mitigation and biodiversity conservation in Latin America through scientific research, as I said, mainly developed by Mary Foundation, part of Philanthropy Corte Solari. From 2024, Francisca is a new member of USAN's 15 Patriots of Nature that bring together the world-leading conservation leaders to mobilize resources and technical capacity and strengthen USAN's management and vision for conservation. You are very welcome, Francisca.
Gracias. Bueno, quiero confesarle que he estado en varios pabellones, pero este es el primero que me siento muy nerviosa.
So she wants
Sí,
to
muy
confess that
nerviosa, muy
that's the
nerviosa.
first panel that she feels very
Y debe
nervous.
ser por el tema.
And probably it's because of the
El
subject.
tema de hablar de la naturaleza, el cambio climático, la biodiversidad y el ser humano.
Probably because we are talking about nature,
Ha
climate
sido el
change.
tema de toda mi vida. Me encanta el desarrollo del ser humano, amo la naturaleza, por lo tanto, nunca he dejado de pensar la relación que tiene
Nature,
el ser
and it
humano
has
con la
been the
naturaleza.
subject of my life.
En
The
las
relationship
presentaciones o en la presentación anterior, en una de las láminas que para mí grafican muy claro todo lo que
the
está
previous
sucediendo,
presentation.
cambio climático, menos biodiversidad en el planeta, eso es igual a lo que comentaba de
In one of the
lo que está
previous
pasando hoy día en el
presentation, we
mundo
talk
con los refugiados
about climate
climáticos,
change,
los refugiados de
biodiversity
guerra,
crisis, and what does it mean in
los
terms
problemas
of
económicos que estamos
climate
teniendo, los
migrate,
problemas de salud que
the
estamos
health
teniendo,
problems
los
that we
problemas de
face,
educación que estamos
the
teniendo.
educational
Entonces, en realidad
problems
lo que
that we
tenemos que
have.
entender es de que el problema es un
Understand
problema general.
This is a
No es
general
un problema
problem.
individual, sino
This
es
is not an
una malla integradora, es un problema que integra. De hecho, en este pabellón podemos ver que estas mallas, que yo insistí mucho en que pusiéramos las mallas, anteriores veces no me habían pescado. ¿Sí? ¿Se escucha? Justo ahora. Ay, ¿va bien?
No, es que ahora sí. No, sí. Now it's working.
¿Entendió?
Sí.
¿Se entendió?
Yes.
Ya.
So
Comentaba de que cuando hicimos el pabellón, yo quería poner
She
esta
was saying
imagen
that
de esta malla
when we
integradora.
designed the pavilion,
¿Ya? Nunca en los otros
she
paneles me
was
habían
thinking to
aceptado
develop
poner la malla integradora, pero yo insistía en que
this
teníamos
kind
que
of
poner esta malla
network
integradora,
in the
porque
design,
finalmente es la representación que
because
tiene que
it was
ver con que todo
the
está
symbol
integrado.
on the
No hay nada
integration
que
of
esté
everything.
fuera de.
Nothing is outside.
Y esa es como mi filosofía
And this is the philosophy,
inicial.
The
Y es por eso que
the starting
me
point
cuestiono
of the
mucho
philosophy.
cuando nosotros como seres humanos nos ponemos en un rol de cuestionamiento hacia la naturaleza y tratamos de
I question
explicar
myself
la
when we
naturaleza
try
o
to
tratamos de
explain the
resolver la
nature, when we try
naturaleza.
to solve
No
the nature
entendemos
without understanding
que tenemos que ser mucho más humildes con la
that we need to
naturaleza,
be
es más,
much more humble
rendirnos hacia la
to
naturaleza
understand that we are here because of
y,
her,
y poder tener, digo yo, herramientas y entender, espérate un poco, y entender de que nosotros somos naturaleza, y si nosotros somos naturaleza, por lo tanto, somos el volcán, somos
and
el
we need to
coral,
understand that
somos
we are
el
nature,
árbol,
we are the
somos
coral,
polvo
we
de
are the
estrellas.
tree, we
Si
are the
nosotros nos
volcano.
vamos al origen de la humanidad, ¿qué es lo que hubo cuando existió el Big Bang?
If we come
¿Qué
back to the
existió?
very
Entonces, ¿de
of
a dónde
reaching of the
venimos?
world, we need to
¿Qué
understand
somos?
that.
Entonces, dentro
What
de
are
nuestro
we?
cuerpo está el
Where do we
universo
come from?
completo.
We are part of
Y
the
cuando yo
universe.
creo que está el universo completo dentro de mi cuerpo, también creo que está esa maravilla y esa bondad
And
del
when we
universo
do
también, y
understand
esa
that, we
belleza y esa
understand that the most
creatividad.
beautiful things
Así
and
como
wonderful
también
things
en
in
el
the world
universo
are
podemos
part
encontrar las
of
otras
us
cosas,
too.
la parte de la oscuridad también. Pero creo que hoy en día
And also the dark side is
el
inside us
tomar la
too.
naturaleza como parte de
But today
nosotros
we need to
es
understand that we are
volver
part
de
of
nuevo
nature,
a lo
and
que nos
this is a way to
pertenece y a
come back
nuestro origen.
to our
Nosotros
origin.
solamente tenemos que recordar quiénes somos,
We only need to remember who
recordar
we are.
que somos líderes de oficios, que en algún momento, es decir, cuando hablamos del oficio, yo digo, hemos hablado mucho de la importancia de
We have
la
been
educación
talking a
mucho
lot about
más
education.
universitaria. Pero ¿qué pasa hoy en día con los oficios?
But what
¿Qué
happens
pasa hoy día
today
con la
with
apicultura?
the
¿Qué pasa hoy día con la agricultura?
with the agriculture?
¿Qué pasa hoy día con la orfebrería o con la albañilería?
I don't know
puedo
how you say that in
ya, pero no
English.
importa. ¿Qué está pasando? Entonces eso es lo que a mí como que me pone nerviosa, es como tal vez el mensaje que
So I'm
quisiera
very
dejar es que
sensitive to the fact
dejemos
that
de
I
mirar
wish
la
to give
naturaleza
one
como algo que
message
está allá.
that we don't
La naturaleza
have to
está
consider
acá
that nature
y somos
as
nosotros los que
something
estamos en
far away
peligro de
from us.
extinción. No sigamos
This is
hablando ni
us
del coral ni
that
de la
are
ballena,
under
porque si
threat.
la ballena, que es el
Because
animal
nature
más
is going
grande del
to
mundo, está en peligro de extinción,
resist,
¿quién está en
we are
peligro de
going to
extinción
disappear.
antes que la ballena? ¿Quién va a morir antes que la
Who's
ballena?
gonna die
¿La
first?
ballena o nosotros? Yo creo que nosotros.
I think we are going to die first.
Y lo otro, que también creo que es importante,
And the
miramos
other
lo
thing
macro.
is that
Pero ¿qué está pasando en lo micro con el cambio climático?
we need to understand
Entonces
the
miramos
macro
lo macro, el
phenomenon.
efecto de lo macro.
We all the
Pero en
time
lo
look at
micro
the
algo está
macro
sucediendo en
phenomenon,
el
but we
cambio
also
climático
need to understand
que
the
no lo
micro
podemos
phenomenon
controlar.
that we cannot control.
Entonces, ¿cuál es el cambio? La pregunta, ¿cuál es el cambio?
So what
El
is the
cambio
change?
es personal.
It's a
El
personal
cambio tiene que
change.
ver con que nosotros necesitamos levantar nuestra conciencia,
We need to have a
abrir
higher
el paradigma,
Open the
dejar de
paradigm,
juzgarnos,
stop
dejar de
judging the other,
diferenciarnos
stop being try to
unirnos.
get differentiate,
y entender de que tal vez vamos a ser nosotros los que vamos a destruir la humanidad. Y así
understand that
como
we are destroying the
nosotros hemos ido
humanity,
destruyendo el sistema, nosotros lo tenemos que
and that
resolver.
we need to solve
Pero yo
it.
creo que hay algo que es más fuerte de todo lo que hemos hablado acá,
But there is something
que
stronger
tiene que
than
ver
that,
con el amor
and
profundo,
it's the love.
el amor verdadero.
To
Porque
truly
cuando yo
love,
amo la
Because
naturaleza,
if we love nature,
cuando yo amo las personas o cuando yo
if we
amo
love
la
people,
vida,
if we love life,
finalmente tú quieres colaborar, tú quieres
Finally, you
ayudar
want
porque
to
tú
help
amas la tierra.
because you love
La tierra
the earth,
es el paraíso.
and the earth,
El paraíso
is
no
the
está
place
arriba,
where
el
you
paraíso es nuestra tierra.
the Eden
Y
is
bueno,
here.
eso era lo que
this
quería
is what I
fuera
want to
de
share.
contexto,
Out
pero
of the blue, but I want to share
siento
that with
eso,
you.
ese es el mensaje, es
This is a
como
message that I
dejemos
want
de
to
hablar de la
share.
naturaleza como si estuviera allá, pongámonos
We
nosotros
cannot talk about the
como que
nature as
nosotros somos los que
would be
necesitamos
something far
cambiar,
of us.
la manera de
We need
mirar
to
la
change, this is
naturaleza,
us that need
la
to change.
manera de actuar.
we need to change
Y eso es para
our
todos los
behavior,
rangos,
and this is
para
for
los
everyone.
líderes mayores hasta para las dueñas
From
de
the most
casa.
important leader until
Gracias.
people that live in their house. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Francisca, for those words. I try to do my best. So now we are going to make some question, but I want to give the floor to the public with a question that David gave it to us about what can we do now, because we already talked about the poly crisis that David mentioned, the complexity and several impacts that we face that Adrian also mentions. You mentioned also, Rahman, a lot of well, the different dimensions that EPCC is including in your report. So we have an agreement of this, but on the other side, we know that multilateral institutions were not designed to deal with this kind of poly-crisis. And if it's true that local communities and people every day, we all know that everything is mixed, but at the end of the day, the institutions are not prepared for that. So, to our public, what can we do according to you? I would like to open the floor to everyone for this dialogue. Please.
So thank you, you all. Thank you. I think one thing that I have seen that you're very passionate and you believe in what you're talking. So I'm Virasamy. I'm from Mauritius, a small island. So one thing, it's amazed me. A lot of people here, we are still talking about reports. So coming from a small island, maybe I have a suggestion. I have seen what have been done for Copenhagen. What can such a similar study be done for all the small islands state and publish it at the next COP? Tell people, okay, this is what's going to happen. Start working. At least this is going to be much better than a report and things like that. Thank you. So that's one thing I think.
I don't know if we want to make another question, to have a couple of questions. Someone else want to edit something? No? So who want to answer? Who wants to answer first?
Let's see. Well, thank you. I think you've pointed out what I heard in your comments is that to see that the assessments, the reports, the plans for action here are really linked to what's needed on the ground, right? So that it's not something that's detached or heading in there. That even if it's a report that's a community of scientific people at the global level, what are the anchors and what's needed in the communities at the front line of these different crises, the climate change crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the other? Does it really communicate or link with them and provide those solutions or ways forward? And that sort of connection so that it seems relevant in a policy area. And I guess that's a little bit about this idea of mobilization of whole of society, even because these processes, we're all delegations, we're all government representatives in many cases. Do we have those linkages, what's needed in those other areas? And is that a clear way for a path forward? But that's what I see with this. And it also, I think, helps overcome this alienation that Francesca's pointed about, this sort of thing we need to come with as well. So.
Thank you very much. Well, with regard to this question, I would add that indeed we need the science, we need the report, but probably it's crucial the challenge of communication of the results, of properly engaging. This increasing number of actors associated to climate action into the whole to the system, and to reduce probably this distance between science and the real implementation at local level. When talking about implication, we're talking about impact for sure. The local scale is crucial. Here we are in a COP, which is a global exercise, but when talking about adaptation, if we want to have really an effective adaptation plan, we need to look at the community level, we need to look at the local level where the impacts are felt, in that sense, the communication, how to better communicate the results is a key challenge. For the IPCC, in this 7 assessment report, there are 3 key pillars. First one has to do with first pillar has to do with the policy relevance, how to be more relevant for policymakers. Secondly, is inclusiveness, the inclusion. They need to consider, for instance, this in a better way, this broad range of forms of knowledge. And thirdly, the interdisciplinarity. There has been an improvement from the very beginning, since the very beginning in the IPCC, including more and more disciplines to the process. This probably explains my presence here as an economist, a development economist in the IPCC. There has been an improvement in that direction, but still there are gaps with regard, for instance, to consideration of social sciences, of many of the social sciences in the whole system. So these three pillars has to do with what you said, the need to incorporate more and more indigenous, the knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities. This is also also very important. And of course, I would like to take the opportunity to also emphasize what David said in terms of integration, better integration across these multiple exercises, or processes with regard to IPCC and the UNFCCC, the IPES and the CBD, and also the land degradation process. I would say this is crucial to better articulate all of these exercises, all of these assessment exercises, but also the implementation of all of these, how to translate these speeches, these statements into actions, into real actions, into policies that are at the end of the day what is needed for accomplishing the, let's say, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goals, or for implementing the desires or the target that we are talking about here.
Thank you. According to that same point, this is one of the main challenge. I mean, bring the knowledge in the IPCC or CBD to the local government. What are you thinking to face that? And maybe Adrian can comment that too, in Francisca. How to get a shoulder this bridge, this gap?
Who do you want to reply first?
You first.
Me first. Okay. A couple of things here. I like the idea that we've got to get this policy other areas. We typically don't think of local communities or informal community leaders as policymakers, but they are. And so I think that's part of the change we have to do, is that a policymaker is at a federal level, a state level, a city level, a small community, a neighborhood level. And so we have to think about that way. How do we get these assessments down there? I think part of it, as Ramon said, it is a communications matter. We need to spend more money on communicating. So we produce these assessments, we get them, and then we need to take that money to work with people to communicate it to other levels. And it's a two-way process. So it's, finding ways to talk about these results, but then working with these lower level people and saying, like, well, what does this mean to you? How would you say it differently? So it's less, we the experts, the chairs of the panels, the people who run the foundations, the people in the UN, about us telling everybody, but dialoguing with them so that we get that back and forth. So I think that's part of it. Under the CBD process, we started something called local biodiversity outlooks. It's something we've just done a couple of them now. And they're wonderful, because what they do is they take this idea of a global assessment and they bring it down, and they get local actors to provide their own visions of assessments of what's going on the level. That's something which is great, but it needs more money. It needs more so we can do it across a greater variety of people. So I think that's what it is. So it's the dialogue, the recognition, recognize that everybody's a policymaker, and then more money for communication. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Francisca?
Ya, gracias. ¿Se escucha?
Sí.
¿Sí?
Sí.
Bueno, aquí también un punto, obviamente sí, las políticas públicas y trabajar obviamente desde el territorio es lo más importante, porque el territorio es lo que nos da y nos identifica también qué tipo de ser humano tenemos sobre el territorio. Por lo tanto, hay que evaluar donde estemos. Siempre lo primero es hacer una evaluación territorial, porque no podemos tener las mismas políticas públicas, y eso nos pasa mucho en Chile, que nosotros tenemos un país que es muy largo, tenemos el desierto de Atacama y tenemos la Antártida. Entonces, obviamente, hay una diferenciación enorme entre una latitud y la otra latitud. Por lo tanto, la diferenciación territorial es fundamental a la hora de trabajar en cada uno de los territorios. Y eso es algo que también lo hemos ido aprendiendo. Entendemos que, la COP, sí.
Yes.
Entendemos que en la COP estamos de alguna manera discutiendo las problemáticas que hay en cuanto al dinero, y creo que es súper necesario para todo lo que es conservación y para todo lo que tenga que ver con cambio climático. Sabemos también que es muy poco lo que se está invirtiendo hoy día en cambio climático, y eso representa que falta información al mundo, tal vez, de que todavía no hay gente que todavía no está creyendo realmente como la realidad. Tal vez deberíamos ser un poco más crudos, digo yo. A veces uno quiere ser menos crudo, pero en realidad yo creo que hay un momento en que hay que ser mucho más fuerte con respecto a lo que va a suceder.
and
Y
when
en
it's going to
cuanto al
happen.
tema de, como decía yo, el tema del dinero, que es interesante que entren a las comunidades, pero para eso también necesitamos una buena gobernanza, porque
But
también
beside that,
nosotros
we
hemos
need
tenido
a
algunas
strong
experiencias que no han
governance
sido suficientes. Es
because
decir, tampoco el dinero
we
lo
have
hace.
not
¿Ya?
very
Es
satisfying
como un conjunto de
experience.
cosas, pero sí el
We know
lenguaje,
that finance is not
obviamente
enough, the
tienen que
money
haber
is not
algunos
enough.
recursos,
We need
pero no
resources
necesariamente a
that
veces para
obvious,
trabajar las comunidades uno necesita
but
grandes
sometimes
recursos.
in community
Lo más
we do
importante
not
obviamente es
need
tener
only
buenos diálogos
resources, we
y
also need
obviamente
dialogue
tratar de buscar colaboradores de las partes que también tengan nuestro
and very good
lenguaje. Es decir,
cooperation.
buscar ciertos líderes indígenas que existen, que están
And for
más
example, native people
capacitados,
that have
como no
the
hemos,
same
también yo me he
languages, that
tenido
have
que
a lot of
capacitar
cultural
para
capacity
poder
in
estar
order
acá. Y creo que también
to
hay
act
mucha
as a
gente de los
bridge
pueblos originarios que
between
están
different
capacitados para poder estar en estos paneles y poder
We have a lot of
pedir o hablar de
representatives
las
that are
cosas
completely,
necesarias sin entrar en una
prepared to be in
confrontación,
this kind of
porque no
panels.
podemos seguir confrontándonos
But the thing is that we
entre
cannot
nadie.
fight anymore. We need to
Eso,
move on.
eso sería.
Thank you very much, Francisca. Adrián, I don't know if you have a comment through Zoom.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patricia, and thank you so much for also to Francisca and the panel for these excellent comments. I agree completely with everything that has been said here. So to the question from our colleague from Mauritius, I think this is a hugely important topic. How can we develop science and data that is actually being used or able to be used at a local level in the areas that is most vulnerable and in most need of this information? First of all, I think we should acknowledge that we do need the reports. So we cannot say that we can skip the reports. The IPCC reports and the data that is being provided in these reports and the information is extremely important. That is the backbone for the next step. But I also agree with with the question from a colleague from Mauritius that we cannot live without the next step. And how to make data and information actionable at a local level. What we need to do here is to provide the network and the connections. So, for instance, right now we have in Denmark developed a climate atlas with very local specific climate information that we are in dialogue with the regions and municipalities and local governments on how they can use this information. So that's a very big job, but something that we find very important. What we could also do, and is now doing, for instance, with a partnership with Ghana, is that we are developing a climate atlas for Ghana and helping the Meteorological Institute in Ghana to work with that climate atlas in the same way in Ghana that we did in Denmark. And I think what we could envision here is that we develop more partnerships from the resource-rich countries like Denmark and the less resource-rich countries like Mauritius and other countries to do the same, developing the data that is usable at a local level and building partnerships for that information to be used at a local level. This is something that is taking time, but if we are to make good adaptation planning, if we are to build the connections between the mitigation and adaptation to climate change, at the same time as building ecosystem resilience and providing nature-based solutions that is working both for the climate and ecology issues, we need to take this step, building the science that is actionable at a local level. And I'll be more than willing to explore how we can do this in a better way in the years to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Adrian, and all of you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Ramon and Francisca, for this wonderful panel. You can follow the World Panel in www.fcs.tv. And thank you, the public, to share this moment with us.
You know, you have a session at 2:30 and you are the panelist. You have a session that I've kept telling you at 2:30. Where you are the panelist.